How's it going guys, Chris here, and in this guide we'll be taking a look at all of those small monsters in Monster Hunter Wilds. So aside from all of those big nasties wandering around the Forbidden Lands, it's also home to a whole bunch of small monsters too, all playing their own roles within their ecosystems, with different creatures being found in certain regions. Starting off in the Windward Plains, one of the first small monsters you'll be able to find is the Bulaqchi. Basically a giant mosquito-like bug that typically hangs around in the valley area. These Neopteran creatures are usually found in groups, sometimes in pretty big swarms, which attempt to overwhelm intruders in vast numbers. Seeing a whole gang of these guys shuffling around towards you might seem a bit daunting at first, but they mainly just act as annoying cave pests, and tasty treats for a passing by Chatacabra. Bulaqchi use their needle-like proboscis to inject digestive juices into carrion, dissolving their food from the inside, thus letting them slurp away on that liquefied matter within. Pretty gross. Having a full belly does make them feel a bit sluggish though, causing them to scutter up nearby walls to rest along the rocky overhangs and ceilings. They're quite sensitive to sound, and they'll often drop down on your head as you wander on by. But being such slow, feeble creatures doesn't exactly make this a fantastic idea for the monster. Though at the end of the day, I guess picking a fight with something that can crush it into paste is a very typical thing for a mosquito to do. If we venture outside of those mineral caves and valleys, we'll often be able to spot a monster called the Baunos flying around above the dusty dunes of the Windward Plains. Windrakes that also choose to scavenge on carrion, left behind by other creatures in the region. Having the ability to reach high up areas, these small dinosaur-like creatures generally like to stay out of harm's way, whether they're perched up along the rocky outcrops, or gliding around high above your head instead. Being able to fly gives the Baunos a distinct advantage over other scavengers, allowing it to scout out wide areas relatively safely, and keep an eye out for any rotting meat that might be lying down on the floor below. It's wise of them to avoid confrontation with other monsters, though if they do need to ward something off, the Baunos can vibrate their thorax feathers to create a deafening roar, a tool that might help to ward something off, but also a tool that can be utilised by yourself, as using the hook slinger on the monster can collect screamer pods, which can be used to disrupt sensitive monsters by emitting a screechy high frequency sound. Probably the most common small monster you'll find plodding around the grasslands of the Windward Plains is the Ceratonoth, which essentially looks like a giant reptilian pangolin covered in brown plates and scales. These herbivores populate the sprawling fields in large herds, grazing on the grass and generally trying their best not to become another monster's dinner. The males are very easy to distinguish from the females, due to them being slightly larger and darker, but of course due to them having a bunch of huge spines jutting out along their backs. Spines which actually help to protect the rest of the herd from electrical strikes during the region's violent thunderstorms, with them acting like conductors, channeling that lightning into the ground rather than it zapping the others in the herd. Being such docile creatures, Ceratonoth are usually targeted by predators like the Doshagama. They don't really have many ways to fight back, typically choosing to flee when things get a bit dangerous, usually being led away by the males which attempt to guide the rest of the herd to a safer area. Who said chivalry was dead? Ceratonoth aren't the only herbivores to roam the open lands of the Windward Plains, with them also being joined by the Dalthydon, which is kinda like a strange mashup between a bipedal dinosaur and a ram-type creature, with powerful hind legs supporting a pretty hefty upper body, covered in thick fur and a bony horned crest. Having better safety in numbers, these guys also choose to live in herds too, moving between different areas and habitats depending on the current climate. So although you'll typically find them in the plains, don't be too surprised to see them popping up in the Scarlet Forest as well. Dalthydon might seem like passive creatures, but they will take action to protect the herd from possible threats, especially if there's any defenseless calves in the group, with them assuming a defensive formation using their cranial plates as a shield wall to block monsters off from reaching the little ones, having the balls to stand their ground no matter how intimidating that threat might be. Aside from being creatures found in the wild, they also play a vital role as domesticated livestock too, bred in human settlements for their milk and wool, while also being used to transport goods to other locations, having enough strength to pull carts across the land, making them very important creatures for farming and trade. One of the more vicious monsters on the prowl, and one that often causes problems for the Dalthydon, the Talioth are small bird wyverns which hunt together in small packs to bring down their prey. These carnivorous creatures are very raptor-like in their appearance and nature, only with elongated beaked jaws full of large curvy teeth, which have evolved to function like a trap, clamping down on their targets to hold them in place. They might be on the smaller side, but they're not afraid to put up a fight, being hostile towards pretty much anything they come into contact with. They won't hesitate to gang up on hunters, just like yourself, taking turns to leap over and snap out of that spiky beak face. And they'll be just as eager to take on some of the bigger monsters, roaming around the same territory too, using sheer numbers to try and overwhelm them. Because Talioth are such a menace in the Windward Plains, this makes their ferocity very predictable. So if you're hunting down a large monster, and you notice a few of these guys wandering around nearby, why not lure them into a brawl with each other, and use the Talioths to your advantage. Another jaw full of razor-sharp teeth belongs to the Gajios, which is essentially the monster hunter equivalent to a crocodile. They look kinda similar, apart from the spiny serrated ridges running along the monster's body and head, sorta making their mouths look like a big double-sided saw. These creatures are classified as leviathans, and they can be found in both the Windward Plains and Scarlet Forest regions, generally paddling around in the shallow pools of water, or basking in the sunbeams by the side of the river, just like a croc would. Probably no surprise to hear that these guys are also carnivores too, being a threat to other creatures that might want to pop on over to take a quick drink, with the Gajios submerging under the water to keep a low profile, striking out at their prey as soon as they get close enough. Those poor Dalthydons certainly ain't got it easy. Gajios will also attack humans too, especially if they get disturbed, though firing your hook slinger at them will actually tear off some of those spiky nose spines, which can be used as bleeding pods to inflict some nice chunks of damage against other monsters. The Gajios isn't exactly going to be very happy with you doing that, of course, so do expect a bit of retaliation in the process. From an angry crocodile to a giant dopey salamander, the Gelidron is an amphibian monster that dwells in the dark sludgy pits of the oil well basin. These funny looking things are well adapted to their scorching hot environment, having a layer of slime underneath their skin to protect them from the searing heat, sort of giving their bodies a bit of a translucent appearance as a result. They're generally pretty docile creatures that can usually be found lazing around together in large groups, not really doing much to protect themselves aside from plodding away from peril and submerging into the oil puddles, or just simply yawning at potential threats to try and somehow scare them away. Surprise, surprise, this isn't usually a very effective tactic to frighten off any attackers, and being such a slow, vulnerable creature with the defensive capability of a sunbathing pensioner, this makes the Gelidron a prime target for other monsters to hunt down, usually being a sitting duck. The fact that they also apparently taste really bloody good is another thing that puts them pretty high up on the menu too, not just for the other monsters, but also for the humans in nearby settlements. So despite having a smiley face and that innocent friendly nature, everybody wants to gobble them up. Aside from being barbecued by a random NPC, one of the Gelidron's main problems is being devoured by a pack of Kranodath, another monster species found in the same environment, and a much more aggressive one at that. Kranodath are really unique creatures in the sense that their skulls have developed the ability to split up into segments, letting the monster expand and contract the armour plating surrounding it, to transform their heads into massive hammer-like weapons, used for smashing into opponents and pulverising them into the ground. These guys kind of act like the oil well basin's version of the Talioth, being another small monster with a pretty feisty attitude. Having an appetite for meat means that they'll happily feast on those poor Gelidrons by clubbing them to death with those head plates, dragging them out of their shallow oil pools, and go on to tear the poor buggers apart with mouths that look like nasty bear traps. With that said, they can be malicious to practically anyone that looks at them the wrong way, even known to gang up on larger monsters, not really having much respect for anything that shares their territory, which means that they're certainly not going to tolerate humans getting too close to them either. So if you wander into their domain, expect them to all come diving over with those boneheads swinging around. Another winged drake can also be spotted in the wild called the Harpios, looking like the sort of thing you'd expect to see in the Avatar franchise. These pterosaur-style things are easily one of the most colourful monsters on the list, with their skin having vibrant blues and yellow pigments, seen gracefully flapping around above the streams and pools in the Scarlet Forest and Oil Well Basin, looking out for small fish and aquatic life swimming around below the surface. Harpios are equipped with a special javelin-styled horn, which they can flip back and forth to either rest on their heads when not in use, or jut out from the front when it needs an extra hunting tool. Despite looking like something that could cause some damage, they're not actually hostile towards humans and other monsters, choosing to stay out of harm's way and just chill out together in little flocks along the riverside. You can actually use those snout horns to your advantage, by pulling them off via the hook slinger, to give you some nice spiky ammunition to use against other, more threatening monsters during hunts. Bit cruel on the Harpios, but being made of pixels, it's probably not going to hold a grudge. If you already see my guide on all of the large monsters, then this next one might look kinda familiar. Congas have been around for quite a while, popping up in some of the past games, being a fanged beast which now lives in the Scarlet Forest, basically a much smaller variant of the Congalala. They look and act very similar, being pink furry hippo monkeys that can't stop farting, only with these ones typically being the females and juveniles, which all stick together in small packs. The adult male Congalalas can sometimes choose to hang around with them too, though they're not actually considered to be part of the group, with the Congas being much more social creatures which rely on each other for better protection, rather than relying on a Congalala who often prefers to wander off and do his own thing. Being related to the Congalala though, you can expect Congas to do a lot of similar stuff, being hostile towards anything that invades their space, lashing out with those familiar arm swipes, belly flops and the occasional bout of flatulence to try and assault their attackers' nostrils and send them packing back into the forest. Another small Neopteran monster you'll probably recognise if you've played some of the past games, the Vespoid is back and just as pesky as ever. These giant wasps can be found pretty much all over the Forbidden Lands in low-flying swarms, being creatures that can adapt to multiple different climates no matter how harsh those climates happen to be, generally being more of a nuisance than an actual threat, and with paralysing poison stingers. These bugs aren't just hostile towards humans, as they can also be hostile towards other monsters too, and if you collect and fire some bright moss at a target, the Vespoids will hover over to them, being attracted by the glowing light. Not one of the better tricks in the book, as they'll often get squished before they get a chance to do anything productive, but at least they might cause a bit of disruption in the process. Aside from those annoying attacks though, they're also one of the more annoying monsters for farming materials, as whacking their delicate bodies with too much force will often cause them to explode. You'll therefore need to be a bit smarter about how you actually kill them to avoid damaging their carcasses, using stones, poison smoke and weaker weapons to drop them without turning them into smoothies. The Scarlet Forest is also home to another small monster called the Piragill, a skinny blue lizard-like leviathan with a load of orange barbs running down the back of its spine. With the forest having vast networks of streams, rivers and pools, the Piragills feel right at home there, being creatures that spend a lot of their time in the shallow waters. They also tend to hang around in packs, being particularly timid creatures that only get the confidence to attack when they know they've got enough backup, surrounding their prey and waiting for opportune moments to strike, all diving in at sudden intervals to try and jab their opponents with those spiny horns. The reason why they like the water so much is because they're designed to travel faster in it, cutting through the surface with those back spines, which sort of acts a bit like fins, with their serpentine bodies moving in a wave-like motion to help propel them forwards using thrust, in a similar kind of way to snakes and eels. The Nerscylla is one of the large monsters you'll find in the Forbidden Lands, but you're also very likely to run into their offspring as well, especially if you're exploring the frosty caves of the Ice Shard Cliffs. These baby spiders are a hell of a lot smaller and weaker in their juvenile form, as you'd probably expect, not having developed poisonous spikes yet, and not being cloaked in that Gypsaros skin either, revealing their true naked form, having a white and orange coloration. Being massively underpowered creatures, they'll resort to biting your ankles, mainly relying on nearby adults to try and save them from being squished, usually acting as a bit of a distraction to help aid the bigger ones in fights. They'll often be found in large swarms, using numbers to try and overwhelm their prey, but they lack the power and size to really do much damage, or give them any notable abilities, though if you whack Arachnophobia mode on, well, they'll basically just turn into flubber. Pretty wild stuff. There's one more bug to be added to the list, with that being the Comaqchi, basically a big pink weevil type thing that also hangs around in the Ice Shard Cliffs too. These guys tend to stick around in colonies, often waiting around on walls to pounce on prey passing through the area. They don't really like moving around very much, and when they do move around, they'll do so at a very slow pace, shuffling their way towards an opponent, having very similar characteristics to the Bulaqchi found in the Windward Plains. Unlike the Bulaqchi though, these monsters are armed with deadly tail stingers, able to inject a sleeping agent used for paralysing prey, and making them easier to attack using a pair of boxing glove style claws, striking out like a mantis shrimp to try and punch their targets in the face. Not particularly brutal attacks, but still something that can cause some disruption nevertheless. Much like the Conga, the Blango is another small monkey monster which travels around in small groups, often led by a dominant Blangonga who basically acts as the alpha male. They're essentially like smaller, weaker versions of the Blangongas, having the same white pelts and mandrill-styled facial features, even being able to use some similar attacks and ice-based abilities too, casting out frost blooms and launching ice balls over range. Unlike Congas though, Blangos are much more reliant on the bigger monsters for guidance, generally acting more like their henchmen, following Blangongas and assisting them in combat, being much more obedient to their commands and rallies. Blangos can still be found alone in the wild, but they're much more vulnerable and far less effective without a Blangonga conducting them. If there is a Blangonga around though, it might be best to take care of the Blangos first to prevent them from causing too much trouble. Maybe even using dung pods to try and shoo them away from the area. One of the funkier looking monsters in this guide is a strange bird wyvern that typically roams around the ruins of Wyveria in small flocks. These things are known as Porkeplumes, and they're basically like a cross between chickens and porcupines, having fluffy afros full of spiky needles which they can use to defend themselves by puffing out those head bristles and charging forwards to slam into their attackers. They're generally quite timid creatures, and after one of the braver members of the flock performs an attack, the rest of them will often dash away while the threat becomes distracted. Those prickly antics might give you a good reason to avoid Porkeplumes, but much like some of the other small monsters, these guys can also be used to your advantage too, with those spiky head bristles being a good source of slinger ammunition, converted into bleeding pods which inflict a decent amount of damage on other creatures that get shot by them. The Rafma is a herbivore with big horns, which can typically be found in the Forbidden Lands' colder climates, being a creature covered in thick fur to help increase its body temperature, allowing it to survive in harsh climates like the Ice Shard Cliffs. Being unfazed by height, while having the ability to leap long distances, makes them even better suited to these environments, allowing them to climb along the region's steep cliff faces to reach higher levels effortlessly. Rafma can often be found prancing around the place in small herds, usually led by an alpha, which stands out from the others by having larger horns and a more vibrant orange pelt, scattered in black markings. These alphas can be pretty aggressive towards anything that might pose a threat to the herd, and aside from ramming opponents with those horns, they're also able to discharge bolts of static electricity with their attacks, shocking their targets and leaving them stunned. The very same horns used to zap things with can be, you guessed it, targeted by that hook slinger to salvage some ammo. In this case, paralytic ammo, which can be shot out to inflict stun damage on whatever's unfortunate enough to get hit by it. So Seikrets play a very big role in Monster Hunter Wilds, being bird wyverns that can be tamed and mounted, to make navigating the world a much easier and quicker thing to do. These feathery raptor-like monsters generally work alongside hunters, with the people of Knapha raising them for many generations, starting out as cute little fluff balls, which grow up to be very important companions. But in the ruins of Wyveria, you'll be able to find construct variants of these creatures, basically artificial versions created by an ancient civilization, being fueled by an energy source called wyvern milk, thus giving them an ominous purple glow resonating through their pearly white bodies. These guardian Seikrets generally have a more sinister, spikier appearance, and they've also got a fairly nasty attitude to back that appearance up, lashing out at humans and other monsters with vicious claw swipes and biting attacks, surrounding opponents in small groups, and using each other to flank around the sides and conduct coordinated ambushes on their targets. Radiating with Guardian energy, these Seikrets can also create mini explosions during some of their attacks, amplifying those strikes even more. And being able to call for backup means that they can very quickly overwhelm their victims with sheer numbers, making some fights feel a bit more chaotic than they really need to be. So if you've not already seen my guide for all the base game large monsters, and you've got around about 45 minutes to spare, then you might want to check that video out next. If you do though, I'd probably advise grabbing some snacks and getting yourself comfortable first. If you're not already subscribed and want to see more guides like this, then you know what to do. And if you enjoyed this one, then please drop us a like and comment too, as that's really going to help the video out. Thanks for watching guys, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.